September 11th, 2023. In the dead of night, Derna was calm. Then, with a roar that shook the city awake, more than 11,000 lives vanished, and a quarter of this ancient place was wiped from the map. On paper, twin dams were supposed to defend Derna from exactly this disaster. Official documents even warned that the result will be disastrous if a flood ever broke through. But those warnings were ignored, maintenance postponed, and cracks spread in silence for years. What really happened the night the mountain wept? And why did no one stop a catastrophe that everyone saw coming? At 2:30 in the morning, Sarah Ahmed Boudra woke to a sound no one in Derna had ever heard before. A roar so deep it rattled the windows, so sudden it tore sleep from every home. She remembers the way the walls seemed to pulse, the air thick with fear, and the first instinct was to run. Down the street, lights flickered as families scrambled for higher ground. Water, black and churning, poured through alleys that had been dry for months. Sarah and her family rushed to their rooftop, clutching each other as the noise grew. The city below vanished beneath a wall of water, carrying cars, trees, entire buildings in its current. In less than an hour, whole neighborhoods disappeared. Streets that had been mapped for centuries were erased in a single surge. The cries for help rose above the flood, then faded. When dawn broke, the city was unrecognizable. Where there had been houses, only broken concrete and twisted metal remained. Sarah's voice, steady but hollow, recounts the silence that followed, the kind that settles only after something irreversible. Official counts named over 11,300 dead, but the true number may never be known. Survivors like Sarah search for familiar faces in a landscape of loss. The scale is impossible to comprehend. A quarter of Derna wiped away, more than 44,000 people left, without homes, thousands still missing. For every name on the list, there are families torn apart, stories ended in the dark. Sarah's memory is crowded with the faces of neighbors and friends, each one a reminder of how quickly safety can vanish. In the hours that followed, the question was not how this could happen, but why no one stopped it. The night the mountain wept left behind more than wreckage. It left a city asking who was meant to protect them, and why the warning never came. The city of Derna has always lived at the mercy of its mountain. In the spring of 1968, the Wadi Derna Valley unleashed a torrent that swept through the city with little warning. Hundreds lost their lives. Streets vanished beneath mud and debris, and the memory of that night haunted every family left behind. In response, the government turned to engineers from Yugoslavia, experts in taming wild rivers and building embankments that could stand against the elements. The plan was ambitious: 2 dams, one above the valley and one just outside the city, designed to catch and hold back the next great flood. Construction began in 1973. For 4 years, convoys of trucks hauled clay, rock, and concrete up the winding roads. The upper structure, Abu Mansour Dam, was the larger of the two, towering over 40 meters, with the capacity to hold more than 18 million cubic meters of water. Downstream, the Al Balad Dam was built as a final barrier, its thick clay core shielded by layers of stone. Both dams relied on bell-mouth spillways, a design meant to funnel excess water safely away from the city below. By 1977, the work was complete. Official ceremonies marked the opening, and for the first time in memory, Derna's residents could watch the clouds gather over the mountains without fear. For decades, these structures delivered on their promise. Seasonal rains filled the reservoirs, but the city stayed dry. Farmers planted their fields with new confidence, and the population grew. The dams were not just concrete and earth, they were a safety net, a guarantee that the horror of 1968 would not be repeated. For a generation, the mountain's anger was held at bay by the work of human hands. Cracks first appeared in the concrete of Derna's dams in 1998. By 2002, maintenance had all but stopped. The clay embankments, once solid, began to erode beneath the surface. Annual inspection logs grew thin, then vanished. In the years that followed, Libya's civil war fractured every chain of responsibility. Two rival governments, one in Tripoli, one in Benghazi, issued overlapping orders, but neither delivered repairs. Money was allocated at least twice, in 2007 and again in 2012. Yet bank records show little evidence of work performed. Turkish contractors hired for restoration abandoned their posts in 2011, citing unpaid bills and growing violence. No one replaced them. In the absence of action, warnings multiplied. Local engineers and international consultants filed assessments detailing the dam's decline. Their language was clinical, but urgent. Visible cracks, spalling, spillways blocked by debris. By 2020, these reports described the dams as overdue for major overhaul by at least a decade. Still, budgets froze, and proposals for emergency repairs went unanswered. The files gathered dust. In late 2022, civil engineering professor Dr. Abdelwanees Ashoor spoke publicly about the risks. He described a system weakened by neglect and a city exposed to disaster. If a massive flood occurs, the result will be disastrous for the residents of the valley and the city, he warned. His words echoed in academic halls and local news, but there is no record of a formal government response. The science was clear, the warnings repeated, but the machinery of the state remained silent. 21 years without repairs and a decade of political paralysis left Derna's last line of defense crumbling, its fate sealed not by nature, but by a refusal to act. Storm Daniel began as a swirl over the Mediterranean, drawing power from waters warmer than almost any on record. By early September 2023, sea surface temperatures hovered at 27.5 degrees Celsius, 2 to 3 degrees above normal. For meteorologists, this was a warning in itself. Warm seas feed storms, loading the air with moisture and energy. What formed above the water was no ordinary system, but a Medican, a rare Mediterranean hurricane, now supercharged by climate change. As Daniel spun toward Libya, satellites tracked its tightening eye. In Greece and Turkey, floods had already drowned entire villages. But the real anomaly was the scale of the storm's intensification as it crossed the sea. Scientists would later calculate that global warming made this kind of event 50 times more likely, and at least 50% more intense, than it would have been a century ago. The Mediterranean, once known for calm blue waters, had become a breeding ground for extremes. On September 10th, Daniel made landfall on the Libyan coast. The city of Al-Baida, less than 100 kilometers from Derna, recorded 414 millimeters of rain in just 24 hours. That's a year and a half of precipitation, delivered in a single day. For context, the average rainfall for the entire region over 18 months, dumped in less than 24 hours. Rivers that had been dry for months became torrents. Hillsides collapsed. Roads vanished beneath water and mud. Meteorologists watching from abroad saw the signature of a warming world in every data point. The storm's path, the rainfall totals, the rate at which Daniel intensified, all matched the predictions of climate models tracking greenhouse gas emissions and rising ocean heat. This was not a freak accident, but a preview. Across the Mediterranean basin, from Spain to Lebanon, the same pattern is repeating. Storms growing stronger, rain falling harder. Disasters once labeled as rare, now arriving with regularity. In Derna, the deluge tested every structure, every promise of safety. But no dam, no embankment, no human design had been prepared for a storm like this. The city's fate was sealed not only by local neglect, but by forces set in motion far beyond the mountain's shadow. At 7 p.m. on September 10th, a curfew swept through Derna. Streets emptied under government orders, not for evacuation, but to keep families indoors as rain hammered the city. No alarm sounded, no text alerts reached the neighborhoods pressed against the wadi. The only warning was the storm itself, drumming on rooftops, filling the valley with water at a rate no one had seen in living memory. By midnight, the upper reservoir at Abu Mansour Dam strained against its limits. Engineers had once calculated its capacity to withstand seasonal floods, but the numbers now belonged to another era. The rain did not let up. Water overtopped the crest, first in trickles, then in steady sheets. Concrete, already weakened by years of neglect, began to erode. At 2:40 a.m., the dam failed. The breach was total. Millions of cubic meters surged into the narrow gorge below, gathering speed as the valley funneled the torrent towards the city. The sound, a deep, rolling thunder, reached Derna before the water did. Barely 5 minutes later, the lower Al-Balad Dam faced the full force of the upstream collapse. Built as the last defense, it was never meant to absorb such a blow. Overtopping here was not a process, but an instant. At 2:45 a.m., the dam surrendered. Clay and rock walls disintegrated. The stored volume, over 30 million cubic meters, the equivalent of 12,000 Olympic swimming pools, was now a single, unstoppable wave. Within moments, the surge hit Derna. Houses nearest the wadi vanished first, torn from their foundations. Bridges, roads, and entire districts disappeared into the flood. The force of the water lifted cars like driftwood and hurled them into the sea. Families trapped by the curfew found no escape. Those who reached higher ground did so in darkness, guided only by instinct and the roar of destruction. By dawn, the city's map had been redrawn by water. The span between 2:40 and 2:45 a.m., 5 minutes, decided the fate of thousands. The consequences of every delayed repair, every missed inspection, every ignored warning, arrived all at once, carried on a wall of water that swept away not just buildings, but the very idea of safety. In the aftermath, Derna's grief demanded answers. Courtrooms filled with the faces of those accused of turning a blind eye. 16 officials, each linked by a paper trail of missed inspections, vanished funds, and unsigned warnings. 12 men heard their sentences read aloud, some for negligence, others for outright mismanagement. The longest faced 27 years behind bars. The charges were clear: failure to maintain, failure to warn, failure to act. But for many, justice felt incomplete. The highest seats of power, those who presided over budgets and policies from distant capitals, remained untouched by the verdict. Hamedi Belade, who lost his entire family that night, sat through every hearing. Each testimony was a reminder of what could not be restored. When the sentences came down, he did not celebrate. Instead, he returned to the camps where tens of thousands still waited for news, for shelter, for some sign that the world had not forgotten them. Over 44,000 people, scattered in schools, tents, and borrowed rooms, each one carrying the weight of survival. Hamedi became a familiar figure among the displaced. He organized food deliveries, coordinated medical visits, and listened as neighbors recounted the night in fragments and silences. His own pain, raw and unresolved, became fuel for the work. In the absence of homes, he built routines. In the absence of answers, he built trust. The city's wounds were mapped in every conversation, every empty lot where a house once stood. But beneath the anger and exhaustion, a current of resilience ran through the camps. Children returned to makeshift classrooms. Families shared bread and stories. Aid groups arrived, sometimes with supplies, sometimes just with promises. The pace of recovery was uneven, but the determination to endure was constant. For Derna, the trials delivered a measure of accountability, but not closure. The law had spoken, yet the larger machinery that failed the city, fragmented, slow, and self-protecting, remained. In the ruins and the camps, the work of rebuilding fell to those who had lost the most. Derna's disaster did not begin or end at the city's edge. Across the world, thousands of dams now stand where the promise of safety has quietly expired. The International Commission on Large Dams counts more than 17,000 structures labeled as high hazard potential, many built in the last century, many now older than the engineers who inspect them. These are not relics buried in forgotten valleys. They hold back rivers above cities from California to India, from the Balkans to Brazil. For every dam, the clock of maintenance and oversight ticks in silence, rarely noticed until it stops. A dam safety expert describes Derna as a warning shot. Thousands of aging dams worldwide face similar risks, especially with intensifying climate change. The lesson is not hidden in technical reports. It is written in every overtopped spillway, every deferred inspection, every budget line erased by political calculation. In Libya, a divided government let responsibility slip through the cracks. As one analyst put it, political survival trumped public safety. But the pattern is not unique. Around the globe, the same forces, fragmented authority, neglected repairs, warnings that gather dust, conspire with a changing climate to turn rare disasters into regular news. Storm Daniel was not an outlier. It was a preview. As extreme weather grows more frequent, the strain on old infrastructure multiplies. Engineers warn that dams built for yesterday's storms are not ready for tomorrow's. The danger lies not just in concrete fatigue or rusted gates, but in systems that treat maintenance as optional and public safety as negotiable. The aftermath in Derna is a case study in what happens when technical failure meets political drift. The wreckage is local, but the risk is universal. In every country with aging dams and rising waters, the question is the same. Will the next warning be the one that is finally heard? Over 11,000 people lost their lives in Derna on September 11, 2023, when two dams, built in the 1970s and left without repair since 2002, collapsed within minutes. Decades of documented warnings, including Dr. Ashoor's 2022 risk assessment and maintenance records, show this disaster could have been prevented. 16 officials were charged and 12 convicted, but the reasons why repair funds went unused and why urgent warnings were dismissed remain partly classified or unexplained. Today, 44,000 residents are still displaced, and reconstruction continues under divided political leadership. Globally, thousands of aging dams face similar risks, made worse by more extreme weather fueled by climate change. The facts from Derna are clear. Neglect, ignored science, and weak governance turned a known hazard into a historic tragedy. The evidence leaves no doubt. Without action, these lessons will be repeated elsewhere.